Years ago, the comedian Bill Engvall said that he wished that he could hand out signs when anyone said something stupid around him. Signs that would warn people, do not trust that person. During his act, he proceeded to give examples of the stupid things that people had said to him, as well as his own smart aleck replies, which would be followed by, here's your sign. For example, Engvall said that he'd gone hunting, shot a deer, and displayed its head on his living room wall, only to have one of his neighbors visit and ask, did you shoot that thing? No, he just ran through the wall and got stuck. Here's your sign. One of my favorites was about a truck driver who managed to get his semi wedged under a low bridge, only to have a police officer come up and helpfully inquire, did you get stuck? No, I'm hauling this bridge across country and I ran out of gas. Here's your sign. In our reading from the Gospel of Luke, Jesus is in the middle of his ministry. He's been sharing God's wisdom and has been performing God's miracles. And then some guy comes up and says he's in a dispute with his brother about his inheritance, and he wants Jesus to mediate on his behalf. You can almost see Jesus writing out a sign for this man. I met a miracle worker, the Messiah, the Son of the living God, and I asked him for legal advice. Here's your sign. But instead, as Jesus often did, he simply chose not to get into this petty argument. Instead, he steers the discussion to the greater issue at hand, greed and the dangers of wanting too much stuff. Or as Jesus puts it in Luke 12, verse 15, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. And again, as he often did, Jesus illustrates the point with a story which we now know as the parable of the rich fool. Jesus says there was a rich landowner who, thanks to a bumper crop, was now even richer. So rich that he had no place to put all the grain that his people had harvested. Now, any farmer would tell you that is a good problem to have. And so he decides to build larger barns and bigger warehouses to store all of his riches. This man's answer to having too much stuff was to build more stuff. Unfortunately, to Jesus, this character in his story is living out what Jesus had already said in Matthew 6, verse 19. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust consume and where thieves break in and steal. Thinking that he has made a wise choice, this rich fool is only turning all of his wealth into an even bigger target. Maybe not for moths or rust, but definitely for rats, who are going to love to feast on everything that has been harvested. And to make matters worse, this rich fool then hears from the very voice of God, telling him that he's not going to live to see any of this. The many years that he was planning for, those years are not coming for him. The ample goods that he was hoarding for himself, they are going to end up rotting in some silo. They're not going to bring value or joy to him or anyone else. And sadly, I have heard of this happening in real life. The choir director at my last church said that when his grandmother passed away, her daughters, his aunts, became like that guy who wanted Jesus to mediate for him. You know, the guy with the sign. These two aunts got into a fight over who would get their mother's set of china. You know, the good china. They fought about this so much that their relationship fell apart, and finally one aunt decided that it just wasn't worth it, and she gave the china to her sister, and they never spoke a civil word to one another again. The choir director told me this story after the winning aunt had passed away, because as her family was clearing out her home, they found that set of the family's good china in a box, untouched, gathering dust in her basement. It hadn't fallen victim to moths or rust or thieves, But she had ruined her relationship with her own sister over something that she never bothered to look at again. Jesus told this story not because he was concerned that having an abundance of possessions would automatically corrupt anyone. In this case, Jesus is more concerned that accumulated wealth wouldn't do any good for the owner or for anyone else either. All of it would simply go to waste. Jesus ends this parable by telling his audience, including the guy with the sign, the moral of the story in Luke 12, verse 21. So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God. Now, wait a minute. What did Jesus mean by that final phrase, being rich toward God? What does that mean? The Bible tells us that all of creation, everything that is or was or ever will be, all of that belongs to God. Everything that we think we own is really owned by God. And God only allows us to hold on to it for a little time. So how can we be rich toward God? To answer that, we turn to our Old Testament reading, where the prophet Moses makes an astounding claim in Deuteronomy 15, verse 4. There will, however, be no one in need among you. Wait, no one in need among us? There'll be no hungry people or homeless people? That sounds too good to be true. But you see, this promise comes with a condition in the very next verse. There will be no one in need among you if only you will obey the Lord your God by diligently observing this entire commandment that I command you today. So which commandments? The Big Ten, the 10 Commandments brought down from Mount Sinai by Charlton Heston? Or is Moses talking about the commandments in this very paragraph that Pat just read for us? How about these commandments? Do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward your needy neighbor. Open your hand willingly lending enough to meet the need, whatever it may be. Do not entertain a mean thought and therefore view your needy neighbor with hostility and give nothing. I therefore command you, open your hand to the poor and needy neighbor in your land. And Moses sums up all of these commandments as well as God's promise for when we obey these commandments in Deuteronomy 15, verse 10. Give liberally and be ungrudging when you do so. For on this account the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and in all that you undertake. And remember, this is from just one paragraph that we read this morning. We haven't even touched all the other verses throughout God's law about taking care of the hungry and the homeless, taking care of widows and orphans and immigrants, taking care of all the poor and powerless who will not have what they need. Moses tells us that God commands us to do all this. And what is more, Moses says this is how we do what Jesus told us to do. This is how we can be rich toward God. We obey God's commandments by opening our hands to the members of our community who are in need. We are rich toward God by being rich toward our needy neighbors. So now, thousands of years later and thousands of miles away, who are those people that we are supposed to open our hands to? Who are our neighbors in need? Those of you who have visited my office may have noticed that I've been collecting things. And for once, I'm not just talking about Legos. Every once in a while, I find one of those signs, often written on pieces of cardboard that people are holding up by the side of the road. They often look a lot like this. Like I said, every time I find one of those, I pick them up off the sidewalk and I bring them around to my office. This is my collection. This is what I've gathered together. And I want you to keep in mind that I only find these when I'm out walking my dog. And I hate exercise, so those are really short walks. Which all goes to tell you, I found each and every one of these within a 3-block radius of our church. Every person who is holding one of these signs could have heard our church bells ringing. And yeah, some of us may have even worshiped with us. If you want to know who is in our community that needs our help, if you want to know who our needy neighbors are, here's your sign. Now, I know what you're thinking. Maybe I don't want to give my spare change to someone holding up a sign by the side of the road. I don't know what they might spend their money on. And yes, I understand. I'll be the first one to tell you, you may not want to give cash to people for asking for money on the street. So what do we do? Well, I invite you to pledge money to this church. As Kathy Purley was just telling us, our mission committee continues to support our mission partners all around Siouxland. This town has been blessed by lots of institutions that are already doing the work that God has commanded us to do. All we have to do is support them. They are the ones who can take our donations and make sure that they are definitely put to good use. Feeding and housing and teaching and providing and giving people their first steps toward what may be new lives for them. Or you can give directly to the charity of your choice. The Warming Shelter, the Siouxland Soup Kitchen, Mary J. Tralia Community House, Safe Space, Sleep in Heavenly Peace, or as Shelley Hexam was up here talking about, give to Crop Walk. And all the fine work that they do to provide food for pantries like at the Community Action Agency. And all the other neighborhood kitchens and food pantries all over the nation that they support. And these don't even have to be cash donations. You can give your time. All of these institutions have volunteer work for you to do to help them in your missions. You can give your talents. Maybe you're particularly good at something. Whether you can drive a truck to help deliver donations, or build a child's bed for a family, or help teach English to someone new to our country. God may have given you abilities for some new project you haven't even imagined yet. Some new way to help out our neighbors in need. I spoke earlier about Jesus' words from Matthew 6. About storing up treasures not here on earth, but in heaven. Jesus finished that famous reading with these words from Matthew 6, verse 21. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So maybe the main question we need to be asking is, where is your heart? Is your heart in this church? Then yes, I hope that this month you will be glad to make a pledge for 2026. Is your heart in this neighborhood? Then look for the missions and charities that are already serving this community and support them in whatever way you feel led. Because our church's neighborhood, this neighborhood right here, we do have a lot of people who are in need. You have literally seen all the signs. Not only is this what Jesus says is the good and right thing to do, Moses says this is our commandment from God. To be rich toward God by being rich toward all of our neighbors in need. We obey God's commandment by opening our hands and giving generously. And this commandment from God comes with a promise from God. When we obey, the Lord our God will bless us in all of our work and in all that we undertake. Or in Jesus' words, we show God where our hearts are by putting our treasure there. And in doing so, we don't store treasures up for ourselves on earth. We don't store it in a silo where it's going to end up molding and rotting. We don't leave it down in our basement where it'll just collect dust. We don't store treasures for ourselves here on earth where it may be stolen or destroyed or simply go to waste. We store our treasures for ourselves up in heaven. And if the words of Moses and Jesus aren't enough for you, heed the words of Louis Prima. Obey God's commandments. Be rich toward God by being rich toward our neighbors in need. And when we do this, there will be pennies from heaven for you and me. And let all God's people say, amen. Friends, I invite